going to be a really outstanding afternoon of presentations. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our chairman up here, Dr. Mark O'Day, to start off our presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Everybody forgets the geologist. We love you, Jim. So this is pretty exciting, a real life, real human interaction. We had cardboard cutouts of all of you ready to go in your places if you'd chickened out. So thanks for coming. So thanks, Adrian and Adam, for organizing and making sure we got people in the room. I'm delighted to see a full, friendly room like this. It's amazing how many friends you have, Dave Moore. Good job. I also want to thank our out-of-town guests. There's a few here from out of town, one in particular from Toronto, Tony Iano. Welcome to our lovely province, which is now being referred to as Jumanji. So it was a year ago, actually, this month. So last November, Dave Moore and I got together for the first time to talk about putting these two companies together. And we had a sort of a shared vision. We'd each sort of done some background work, and the goal was to put something together that was unique, that had critical mass, that was a combination of scale and grade, and to create one of the best pipelines of any exploration company focused on copper, gold, and BC. And I think we've come pretty close to that. And this is the manifestation of discussions that started a year ago. And so NorthWest Copper is the product of that. And nothing really happens by chance. I mean, this is not something that is attributed to luck. There's an expression that I like, which goes like, luck is the residue of design. And so you got to turn that around in your head a little bit, but luck is the residue of design, right? And so this has been a very purposefully designed combination that really is the culmination of a huge amount of experience, talent, effort, skills, and strategy to create what's in front of you today, which is NorthWest Copper, which has really only been around for 9 months. I know a lot of you have been investors in largely the Serengeti side of the story for 10, 15 years. This new company has only been around 9 months, and we've accomplished an amazing amount of things, which I'll take you through very briefly, and Peter and the rest of the team will elaborate on. I think what is particularly timely and interesting from my perspective is that this is all happening while Goldman Sachs is calling copper the new oil, right? Like, could our timing be impeccable here? Do we have great things to come driven by the commodity price and the role that copper is playing globally for the whole electrification theme? As investors and analysts and corporates here, which sort of characterizes the cross-section of this room, there's lots of ways to value or evaluate a company, as we all know. Right? We all have our kind of pet ways of doing that. The most rudimentary or crudest way of doing it, obviously, is sort of an in situ value, right? How many pounds do you have in the ground? How many ounces of gold do you have in the ground? And ascribe a value per pound. And if you go down that road, we would hold our own against any of our BC peers. We've got 2.2 billion pounds of copper. We've got 2.8 million ounces of gold, and we've got 16 million ounces of silver. That's all under the hood. And if you kind of extend that alchemy a little bit further, that's about 7 million ounces of gold equivalent. That's what our portfolio holistically contains today, right? And for a $90 million enterprise value, that seems pretty darn cheap. Now, obviously, that's a pretty rudimentary way of valuing and differentiating companies. There's all kinds of better and sort of more rigorous ways of doing it. And I want to touch on a couple of buckets that I think are important, as investors looking in, as analysts sort of formulating a thesis on the value of this company. Obviously, the most important is grade, right? And so one of the themes that underpins this whole combination is grade. Stardust was a discovery. The deep part of Stardust was a discovery back in 2018 that spurred a whole wave of excitement around this massive sulfide system. With 100 meters of 5% copper equivalent. And 2 years later, we've drilled off one of the highest grade, and it's still incipient, it's still a growth story, one of the highest grade sort of massive sulfide stories in BC for a long time, and we've culminated that with 8 million tons of around 2% copper equivalent. And our view was that would be a great, not only is that almost a standalone project in its own right, that would be an amazing component of feed for a combined Quinnica Stardust project when you subset that inventory of metal and just focus on the high-grade component of Quinnica. So that's what we've been focused on. And while all that grade theme has been evolving, Quinnica itself, as a mature-ish exploration project, continued to deliver surprises. And we hit, in fact, the highest grade hole ever hit at Quinnica this year, 217, and returned 2.92% copper equivalent, not 0.2, 2.92 over 235 meters, right? And you got to sort of take pause when you hear numbers like that, because that ranks in the top 5 best drill holes in the world this year. And it's up there with Filo and those types of deposits. And it's right here in our backyard that you can drive to. Not up at 4,000 or 5,000 meters. It's right here in our backyard. You can leave Vancouver for breakfast and be up looking at core at lunchtime, right? It's incredible. Which brings me to the next theme, which is access and location, right? Billions of tons of copper around the world are sitting in the ground, undeveloped and undevelopable because they're in the wrong places. Either you can't get to them, the social climate's wrong, what have you. So I don't think we could get a better located core asset than what we have here. We can drive to it. The topography is modest. The snowfall and the rainfall is modest. You can work there year round. And with the great work of Vesta, who's our VP Sustainability, we've got lasting relationships with all of the First Nation groups that are in our area, right? So having social license, social acceptance from the communities which host our deposits, as well as the Indigenous groups around us, is absolutely vital in this day and age, as we all know. Like, we are in an industry where, I'm going to say 30 years ago, 100% of the risk was subterranean. And I would say the era we're in right now is 100% of the risk is above ground, right? So things have completely inverted. We've got new discoveries to boast about. As an explorationist or a former explorationist, you'd just imagine going into a virgin target and drilling something for the first time. And if you're lucky, you get something that's slightly ambiguous, or maybe just enough smoke to keep you coming back to sort of tease you into thinking you have a system there. Well, that's not what happened this year at East Niv, right? So Dave Moore and his team at Serengeti had dressed this target up from first principles, so they deserve all the credit for that. And we drilled it for the first time and made a bona fide new porphyry copper gold discovery that will be on the maps of BC for all time, right? And that hole was 0.56 copper equivalent over 81 meters. And when you look at the grades that are being mined in BC porphyry deposits around the province right now, that is well and truly an ore grade intercept. And that came in the first 4 holes drilled on this property. So this team has demonstrated the fertility of this pipeline, the growth and the engines that still exist to drive value, right? It truly is a pipeline in the truest sense of the word. You've got, at one end of the spectrum, you've got this incipient discovery that's going to drive value and create all kinds of excitement with ongoing exploration. And at the mature end, you've got a development stage project through the combined Quinnica and Stardust footprint. Capital, let's talk a little bit about capital. It's the key to this business. It's hard to get your timing exactly perfect, but undercapitalized companies go nowhere. And so it's a trade-off between dilution and timing, really. And the alternative to dilution is being broke and not being able to talk about what you want to do, what your dreams are, what your aspirations are. And we've got big aspirations here, and we need the balance sheet to do that. And so we've been successful with the help of a lot of people in this room. We've been successful at raising $43 million in 9 months in 3 separate financings, and we now have that monkey off our back completely. We can go talk about what we want to do for the next 12 to 18 months without any kind of fear that there's a financing overhang or where are they going to get the money or they can't afford to do that. We can afford to dream big and we can afford to move things along quickly. And ultimately, you know, we're in the business of human capital, right? That's what this business is really all about. Obviously, you need money to drive your ambitions, but really it's about human capital. And a big part of this combination came with a brand new management team that is aggressive, hungry, talented. It's led by Peter Bell up here, who was sitting lonely here at the table by himself. And I've known Peter for 15 years, and he was the toughest analyst I'd ever had, or toughest fund manager I ever had to go pitch to when I was running public companies as the CEO, because he asked all the tough questions, and he hated everything, right? Almost everything. And then he moved on to become an investment banker at National Bank, and we continued our relationship. And prior to that, prior to him being involved in Polygon and Hawke's Point out of London, he was a Newmont geologist for 15 years and was the chief geologist at Yanacocha, you know, that little gold mine. So he's a unique, rare example of somebody who can sort of span the whole spectrum of skills from outward-facing, market-facing to technical savvy, and he's got the chops to know when a good project is there and what to do about it. And so when he came aboard, I thought it was a great testament to the value and the quality of the portfolio that we put together here. We were lucky enough to pull Jim out of his pajama retirement in his vineyard, and Jim is a world-renowned Cordilleran porphyry expert who has probably stood on and analyzed more porphyries than anybody else out there, or almost out there. And he has now joined us as our chief geologist and adds a huge amount of bench strength, worldwide knowledge, technical know-how, and he's a rare breed also in the fact that he's able to bridge sort of the academic ivory tower world of science and the practical requirements of exploration. And so that's incredibly unique as a skill set. Ian Neal is not here today. He's our VP Exploration, and he is the guy responsible for drilling two of the best holes to come out of BC in the last decade. The first was the 421 zone, 100 meters of 5% copper equivalent, and now this latest one at Quinica, which had a subset of 33% copper over 9 meters. So he deserves a huge amount of acknowledgement and recognition as well for the work he's done. And Vesta Filipchuk has also been lured out of semi-retirement. She spent her career interfacing with and building skills and relationships around communities in BC, First Nations, Aboriginal groups in BC. And she walks the walk and talks the talk, right? She goes into these communities, people know her, they respect her, they like her, and she delivers on what she says. And she's helped us forge new relationships, take them to a new stage, bring this company into the world of ESG, and we now have solid relationships with all of the Indigenous groups that are around our projects that we're actively working on. So the Takla, the Seke Dene, and the Gitsan in particular, we all have active exploration agreements in place. And then there's a broad subset of the team, too many to name right now, but I think it's an exceptionally talented team. It's one that has had to learn how to integrate as a new entity. That always takes time and effort and is not without its challenges. But we've done a great job. We've achieved a huge amount this year. And next year is going to be an even bigger, hopefully better year. And so I want to hand it over to Peter to take us through the next piece of the vision. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'll repeat what Mark said. It's nice to be in front of a live audience, as it were, and not talking on Zoom as we usually do. So nice to see everybody here, and thanks for coming to speak to us. So the way the rest of the discussion is going to go is I'm gonna talk a little bit about, Mark talked about our that none of this happens by accident. I want to talk a little bit about how we see the business as a business. So, where are we focused? Why are we doing it? Why are we where we are, and how are we moving it forward? Then talk a little bit about some of the kind of wins that we've had this year. So rather than go through a blow by blow of all the drilling that we've done, I just want to talk about here we discovered this zone, and here's what we think it means, and quite quickly. And then I will turn it over to Jim, who's going to provide a little more geologic detail on East Niv and on the 217 zone or mineralization, and then over to Vesta, and then I will wrap up with a bit of an overview of how we see 2022. We haven't got formal plans yet, but we certainly have an idea of where we would like to spend the money that we have. So lots of great targets, and so that's the way I'll go through it. I'm running this right.
Just flick it forward. Just use the arrows.
Help me.
Switch it. I might have switched it off here. We've actually lost our screen right now behind you.
Okay.
So this will be for online only.
Apparently you guys can't see the screen, but well, that's better, because then I don't have to repeat the same thing that you're reading. So basically there are three, if you think about the company overall, there are three kind of pillars of how we have value in the company as I see it. And Mark mentioned my background. I came over to this job from an actually pretty good other job, so I was obviously attracted to the opportunity. And the things that attracted me are, first of all, the whole copper story. So I think everyone's familiar with the whole electrification theme, but it's not just copper in the ground or copper metal, it's copper projects too, right? There aren't a lot of copper projects available, and really what we're kind of producing in a way is a copper project, not necessarily copper metal. So, the discovery rates have dropped, the investment in grassroots exploration has fallen, and there's not a lot in the pipeline, just as things are kind of stepping up in the other direction. So that commodity backdrop is really supportive, and that was attractive to me and should be attractive to investors in general. But there are also a couple of other stages, and Mark talked about my questions I used to ask when I was at Polygon. We were very focused on the pre-production space and on things going from advanced exploration and de-risking through going eventually into production, because there's a great re-rate there if you get it right. So that's where we have the opportunity here in the de-risking part of the business, of taking the Quenica Stardust combination that was put together, dreamed up kind of last year, and this fantastic project, taking it, de-risking it, taking it through permitting, all that kind of stuff, and creating value at the other end. But then the other part that provides urgency, excitement, share price uplift is the exploration part. And we've got this big exploration pipeline, and it keeps getting bigger. And we've shown this year how dramatic and important that is for the share price. We saw basically 50% move in the share price on a drill hole. That's the kind of thing that should be exciting to anybody. And adding that kind of value adds the third sort of leg to the support of the project. So our strategy is really focused on low risk jurisdictions in areas near existing infrastructure, and that's what we've done. We're in this part of BC, great place to operate, low elevation, great roads. We can drive to every project. We're picking kind of quality over quantity. So we're not trying to make this thing as big as possible. We have a big inventory, but we're focused on the highest grade part because we're trying to produce something that's relevant in scale, but still big enough or manageable enough for us to put into production and advance ourselves. That high capital efficiency actually produces a smaller footprint. It's better from a permit point of view. It's better from a carbon footprint point of view. There are a lot of attractive elements of building a project like that. Sorry, when's... Okay. All right. Well, you have to bear with just listening to me for a while. We've got a big exploration pipeline. We've got about 150,000 hectares sitting between Mount Milligan and Kemess. Dominant landowner or claim holder in that part of British Columbia. So lots of opportunity for scale, lots of opportunity for discovery, and we've been pushing those projects forward and maturing them and getting them ready for more drilling and discovery. A highly skilled team, as Mark mentioned. We're building partnerships with Indigenous and other communities. That's also a big part of our strategy, because you can't get anything done without doing that. It's the right way to do it, and it's something that we actually really believe in, and we believe we build an asset for the company by creating those relationships. And maintain a strong balance sheet, which we've just done on the financing, so we're obviously well funded for doing whatever it is that we want to do. So I am going to describe the slides that I can where you don't have to see them. So I'm really talking about kind of the outcomes of our work this year and how it's been beneficial. So when we started in March 2021, when the company was first formed, we had East Niv as a dream out there, but really we had kind of two drill projects to look at, which was Quinnica and Stardust. Now, after the exploration that we've had, we've got Quinnica, Stardust, we've got this Quinnica high-grade target to chase, we've got East Niv to follow up on, and we have Lorraine that we've done a bunch of work on now, and we actually have drill targets ready, and we'll have a program at Lorraine too. So now we have actually 5 places to augment our exploration possibility of success and add that kind of extra sizzle that goes along with the development and advancing the projects as well. So that's important. I'll describe. So I'm describing some of the things that we've come up with. One is on this hole 217, and I just put it in just for my own kind of amusement and reference. The high grade part of that hole is about 9.4 meters of, as Mark said, almost 35% copper equivalent. So just to put that in an unconventional and probably unauthorized way of looking at it, pounds per ton I did, because I just wanted to compare it to other projects. And the reason I did this is because people always ask me, they say, well, it's drilled in Quinnica, so, I mean, how big could it be? Is it, and I say, the reality is, if you added 1 million tons of that kind of material, that would add incredible value in the project. So you don't need a whole lot of it. Pounds per ton, that hole is about 740 pounds per ton. If you look at the average BC copper mine, it's about 11 pounds per ton. So even Stardust is 44. So it's, you don't need a whole lot of that stuff to change things, and we'll certainly have an aggressive program trying to follow that up. I've got a slide here showing copper discoveries from 1990 to 2020. There are basically almost none since 2014. I think just 3. And East Niv appears to be, we've made a discovery there. It's not a resource or anything yet, but a new discovery is obviously incredibly rare. We've basically taken what was literally moose pasture a few weeks ago and actually have, plus 1% copper and 80, more than 80 meters of 0.5% copper equivalent there. Now a real genuine discovery in a brand new belt in a big 43,000 hectare land position. Another one, Stardust. So just to remind everyone, we basically took Stardust from 3 million to 8 million tons. Huge move in the size of that resource. Another great thing that we did in May. And then just to comment on Stardust, and you can't see this slide, but it shows where Stardust ranks. It's in the top quartile of grade for copper deposits in Canada. And we also have Quinnica on here, and we're obviously focused on the higher grade part of Quinnica. So we're going to go to Jim here, and I don't know how Jim's presentation is going to work without a video, but
they're showing up online.
Okay.
Now I have to find my.
I'll shut it down for you. I'll switch
Okay.
it over. And I didn't forget your name, by the way. The whole system crashed while I was introducing you. That was this.
Oh, wait a minute. There we go.
We got it back.
Good.
All right. Get this here.
Geology is boring enough without having graphics to show.
And now I get to introduce our chief geoscientist, Jim Lang.
Okay, so over to the technical people now, but I want to lay some of your fears to rest. I'm not going to stand up here and throw a bunch of dry, boring old geological tidbits at you, although there may be a couple. What I really want to do is step back and look at our projects a little more high level and what makes them promising in perspective and ripe for discovery. And I was going to also make a fair bit of point about the quality of some of the geology team that we have and the exploration team, but that's been hit pretty hard already. But suffice it to say, the people that we have working in the group have a lot of experience in a variety of things, from project management to exploration drilling to modeling, et cetera. And so we're the right team, I think, or we have the right team in place to effectively advance these projects. So what do I... Okay, so let's start by looking at the projects as a whole. I'm going to turn around and look at this because I have a real difficulty with the screen. The images are quite small. But we have very extensive holdings, as noted. They go from Mount Milligan in the southeast all the way up to the Comes area in the northwest. And we have a variety of projects. We're going to talk about Quinique and East Niv mostly here, but we have Lorraine, which is a copper-gold porphyry deposit associated with alkalic rocks. We have the high-grade Stardust copper-gold deposit, and we have numerous other deposits or properties at various stages of exploration. And I think this is important because having a lot of projects with a variety of levels of advancement gives us quite a bit of strategic and tactical optionality in how we advance our programs. And so that we can design what we need to design to advance the projects and add value to the company according to the climate we're working in. The question is, well, why in this belt? Well, this belt's quite important. It occupies the northern part of the Quesnel terrain and the eastern part of the Stikine terrain. And these terrains are the terrains that extend from the Canadian-US border all the way up through the Golden Triangle. And they contain almost all of the major copper-gold porphyry deposits in Canada, or in the Western Cordillera anyway. And for our projects, we have projects that include older Triassic deposits like the East Nib discovery that we've made. We have a little bit younger deposits of Jurassic age that are associated with the large Hogan batholith and other younger rock types. The whole belt itself has lots and lots of known porphyry deposits and showings and prospects. So it's extremely well mineralized, but it's a bit surprising to me that a lot of parts of this belt have not been extensively explored. There's a lot of ground out there that has not really been covered in any kind of detail, including some of our own properties. And so there's a lot of opportunity to make discoveries in this belt because they haven't been hit so hard as some of the other parts of the province. Let's move on and look at East Niv. The East Niv discovery is very exciting. It's a completely new copper-gold porphyry deposit that was not known until this summer. We have released only 4 of the 10 holes that we've drilled in it. All 4 of those have extensive copper-gold mineralization within them throughout their length. All 10 of the holes that we did drill, I can say, have been affected by very extensive, very intense hydrothermal alteration characteristic of what you find in porphyry, copper, and copper-gold deposits. The alteration that we've confirmed by drilling only covers a small portion of the larger property. This thing doesn't seem to do much of anything. So anyway, the property itself the system is at least 5 square kilometers in size, so it's quite a big footprint already. That's defined by the IP chargeability anomalies and geochemical anomalies at surface. We've only drilled most of our holes in one little part of that in the center, and all of those have hit strong alteration. Most of those holes are also quite shallow, so we haven't tested anything really to depth. One point is that we've dated the intrusions and the mineralization, and they're very old. They're about 224 million years old, which makes it about the oldest porphyry system that I'm aware of in the Cordillera. But that's important from an exploration perspective, because here on the property, most of the ground is underlain by mafic volcanic rocks of the older Takla group. So our deposit is part of that group. The ridgelines are often capped by younger rock types. Those are younger than the hydrothermal activity, and they could easily then be concealing the full extent of some of the anomalies and targets that we have on the property. We have a lot of good geological data that we've acquired from the drilling and from our surface work, and we've got a lot of drill targets that we can follow up on in the coming seasons. But we still have work to do. We need to do more property scale surveys. We especially need to do some regional geological mapping and especially focus on structural geology on the project to better understand how our targets have been affected by structure, where they may be displaced to, et cetera. Hydrothermal alteration is really strong and it's really favorable, the types that we see at East Niv. Most of the copper mineralization that we're seeing is associated with potassic alteration of one or two types. There's K-feldspar, there's biotite magnetite alteration. These are associations that you see typical of most of the better copper gold porphyry deposits in BC and elsewhere. These are overprinted by high level and or peripheral styles of alteration. And these include pyritic alterations like propylitic, but also chlorite, pyrite, nilite, pyrite alterations. These are the types of alterations that you would see at a high level in a system, suggesting that it's been well preserved. There's a lot of carbonate in the system, which is environmentally positive. And there's also apparent zoning to the alteration associations that we see, which suggest vectoring, exploration vectoring to the northwest into areas that we have not yet drilled, and also to depth. So lots of stuff, lots of ground to target yet. A lot of people like to say, well, what's the deposit like? I would say that based on the alteration types, the types of associated intrusions that we have, et cetera, that red Chris is a potential exploration analog for this deposit. It's similar in scale. It's similar in these other geological characteristics. Not a bad target to have as an analog. The mineralization is very nice there. In the holes that we have looked at and released, we see excellent hypogene mineralization that occurs both in quartz sulfide veins, as you see in the upper left, and in potassic alteration. The mineralization itself is mostly chalcopyrite, but it does have some bornite, which are those pink minerals there, and they're strongly associated with magnetite. And there's only, in the areas where you have a lot of copper mineralization, there's only a little bit of pyrite. So it's a high copper sulfide, low pyrite mineralization style. The copper minerals, as you can see, the chalcopyrite in yellow and these little pink bornites are quite discrete, so they'll liberate well if you grind the rock up. And our geochemistry shows that there's very low concentrations of deleterious elements, like arsenic and things like that. So it's very clean, and this type of mineralization should be very amenable to good processing and recoveries. Moving on to Quanica, the thing about Quanica that's quite striking is that in contrast to what I would say is a myth about BC porphyries, that they tend to be low grade, is that Quanica has lots of high grade mineralization. And we have it in a couple of styles. Most of the high grade that we see looks like this. It's related to high densities, high concentrations of quartz sulfide veins, and the veins themselves are deformed, they're broken, they're quite messed up. They look a lot like that. You can see it's quartz, and you can see there's a lot of sulfide in it. Those veins are also associated with strong potassic alteration, which contains additional disseminated copper-gold mineralization in the wall rock. These zones of deformed and well-mineralized veins form tabular zones within the deposit, and they have quite compressed lateral zoning around them. And these characteristics indicate that Quanica has high grade probably because it has a strong, really intimate structural control that focused hydrothermal fluid flow and allowed the mineralization to upgrade and upgrade over time. And so we get these very high grade zones within it. And Mark mentioned the 235 meter interval that we drilled this year, and it's mostly of this style. And elsewhere in the deposit, we've seen the same kind of style with similar types of grades sometimes. The second type of high-grade mineralization is what we reported this year, which is shown here, and that's the 30-odd% copper equivalent over 9 meters that we hit in hole 217. This is some sort of a breccia-related style of mineralization. The breccia matrix is dominated by chalcocite and bornite and covellite, and then we have fragments of altered host rock, intrusive rocks, and quartz sulfide veins like we see in the other main high-grade alteration type or mineralization style. And again, collectively, when you look at these two styles of mineralization, it just strengthens the argument for a strong and intimate structural control. And that's important because for our exploration, it says we should be focusing on what these controlling structures are for these high grades. That's the key thing here. And that's a very different style of exploration approach than if you're looking at, say, a specific rock type or some other characteristic. So this gives us something to focus on, and then we can have better opportunity for success to find more of these or extend the ones that we know. To strengthen that argument, I would argue that a good analog to Quinnica may be the Ridgeway gold-copper mine that Newmont mined in New South Wales for a number of years in the early 2000s as part of the broader Cadia system. And Quinnica is shown on the left, Ridgeway on the right. We see similarities in veins at the top. These are cross-sections at exactly the same scale. So here we have the mineralization and associated intrusions at Ridgeway, and the same scale we have a cross-section through Quinnica. Lots of similarities. The size and geometry is very similar, controlled by steep structures and steeply dipping dikes, dike-like intrusions, laterally compressed patterns and alteration in veins. Okay, good. Metal assemblage is very similar. One factor that's very important and is a little bit odd for most porphyry deposits is that we get significant intersections of multi-gram gold associated with moderate to high-grade copper. And you see that extensive. That's much of what Ridgeway is, and much of our highest grade mineralization at Quinnica is of that same style. So again, this comes back to the importance of the structural control as the exploration focus for us. And another thing is that we have at Quinnica the potential for blind discoveries of more super high-grade mineralization. I say that in part, now the Ridgeway section is truncated at the top, but Ridgeway is completely blind. And that's common in these types of structurally controlled deposits, which tend to taper out towards the top, and there's not a lot of leakage and not a lot of indications of their presence. So even though we have a fair amount of drilling at Quinnica, there's still a lot of opportunity to find more of these structurally controlled high-grade zones. And the last slide that I have is to point out that Quinnica is a much more advanced project than most of our other projects, certainly more than the early discovery that we made here at East Niv. It's got lots of drill holes, it's got an established resource, we've studied the geology of it quite extensively, know quite a bit about it. I've worked on, in the last 20 years, much of my career has focused on advancing large porphyry deposits through economic studies, including positive feasibility studies. And the one thing as a geologist that you know or learn about those types of projects is that the quality of the work that comes out of the studies at the end is largely dependent upon the quality of a bunch of different kinds of three-dimensional models that you put together based on the observations of the deposit. And these are some of the main models that we as geologists are involved with. And there's some of the applications that we have toward mine development down the road. And then in the final column, I show my interpretation of where we stand at Quinnica with respect to those models and their development. Some of them are a little bit early and haven't been very well developed, like a geohydrologic model. Others are at kind of an intermediate stage where we have quite a bit of constraint on the three-dimensional distribution of characteristics in the deposit. But there's still opportunity to improve that, and we're acquiring data in our drilling program specifically to improve those models. And other models, we have very excellent control, really good control that we can use and apply. And the important thing is that if you have good models like this, which we have now at Quinnica and are developing at Quinnica, that significantly de-risks the development aspects of the deposit going forward, especially your economic modeling. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to turn it over to Vesta now to talk about sustainability and First Nation relations and such. And thanks very much.
How do we advance this?
Such up, super easy. This one here. At least you get a screen. This is good. You get the whole thing. Eventually.
Oh.
So there you go. And you got these little arrows here, and you can click it through.
Perfect. I'm a bit shorter. Well, thank you for coming today. I'm Vesta Filipchuk. I joined NorthWest Copper in June of this year. As they said, I was dragged out of semi-retirement, but I had worked in this area of the province previously and really enjoyed working with the communities and had built good relationships on other projects I'd worked on. So it seemed like a good opportunity to join a project that had good upside, but also a good opportunity to work with the nation. So I just want to go through a little bit about what I've been doing since I joined the company and shed some light on that social environmental component of the project. So we recognize, as you probably do as investors, that the social and environmental performance is critical to moving these projects forward. We were very fortunate that Serengeti and Sun Metals had good working relationships for a number of years with the Indigenous people in this region. So we are continuing to focus on building that relationship and resetting that relationship. So we are working with the Gitxsan Nation, the hereditary chiefs of that region we're working in East Niv, with the Takla Lake First Nation, Seke Dene, and the Nakazli Hutan Nation. We have exploration agreements, and these exploration agreements are framing our relationships. They guide us in terms of how we work with the communities, but also how we treat the environment, and then also what kinds of economic commitments we make to the nations. So we're committed to working collaboratively. This is what Indigenous people are looking for here in Canada, is to be recognized, to be respected, and to work closely with them. We see that this is actually a great opportunity for us to learn from their traditional knowledge, to minimize our potential impacts, and then also to create opportunities for them in parts of the province that are economically suppressed. They really want to have opportunities for their young people. And I have seen where projects that are successful really do make a very positive impact in these communities, and they recognize it as well. So we're focused on engagement and dialogue, and believe that if we can create a common vision on the future of this project, we will create a pathway for development. Okay. Just go enter.
Yeah, just click the little, mouse pad here.
Okay. Technologically challenged. So, this is, okay. So exploration agreements are really critical. I would say I sort of entered the mining sector about 12 years ago. I'd worked previously in the energy and oil and gas sector. I would say exploration agreements are really critical, and we find that this is one way that you work well with the nations and that you're defining your relationships. So Serengeti and Sun Metals were very successful in negotiating agreements. So on the East Niv project, we have an agreement with the Seke Dene and the Takla Lake First Nation. It's a joint agreement. And we have an agreement with the Gitxsan hereditary chiefs. At Stardust and Quinnica, we're working with the Takla Lake First Nation. And so it's primarily recognized that this project is within their core territory, although I'll show you a map here in a minute, that there are some overlapping interests. At Top Cat, we're working again with Seke Dene and also Takla Lake Nation. And at Croy Bloom, we're working on a traditional use study, which is becoming very common when we're working on the land, is that the nations want to understand how they would have traditionally used the land and how our work may potentially impact that, but how we can collaborate on minimizing impacts. The Lorraine project, we are working on exploration agreements with the Seke Dene, the Takla Lake Nation, and also Nakazli. So we are in the process of setting up meetings to begin those negotiations. So here's a map that demonstrates some overlapping territories. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Sorry. There we go. So you can see here we have the Takla Lake Nation, the Seke, the Gitxsan and Nacazli nations. Our projects here, the one to the south is the Stardust Quinnica, and the one in the center is the Lorraine, and the one at the top there in the left is East Niv. So we're recognizing that there is this shared interest, and sometimes that becomes a bit of a tricky space to operate in. We're, working on building on those existing relationships that Serengeti and Sun Metals had built. And so we began our relationship with the First Nations by establishing leader-to-leader meetings, and we've been successful at doing that with the nations. Peter came into the communities, and we spent a number of hours sort of speaking with the leaders of the community and their lands people. I would say those meetings went very well. I received feedback from the nations that they thought Peter really represented somebody who would listen and understand their perspective, and I would say that's a very good starting point. You don't always find that sometimes, but he really showed up well, and I think it was a great sharing opportunity, and we all learned a lot from our conversations. So moving, we really want to focus on that collaborative planning and engagement and creating opportunities for employment and contracting, as we know that the contracting piece is becoming increasingly important to the nations. They want to see some economic opportunities during the exploration stage, which I think actually helps us to build capacity as we move into a more advanced project. And that's really what sustainability is all about, is building out those skills and opportunities for the nations. So we're committed to having open and transparent dialogue and minimizing potential impacts, and respectful engagement. Building that respectful form of engagement is going to be critical to reaching free, prior, and informed consent, which is a key part of our regulatory process. Okay. So you may or may not be familiar with the new provincial environmental assessment process. I just put it up there as a guide. We're not in the process at the moment, and I don't want to talk about years or timelines, but I just want to talk a little bit about process. So if we place ourselves just above the early engagement component, this is where we really have the opportunity to get on the right foot and establish that relationship that's going to help to guide us. So we want to build that long-term relationship that's going to carry us through an EA process, but also into the development of a project. Establishing this foundation of consent is going to be key to the project through the regulatory process. So as we do technical studies and engage with First Nations, it will help to inform the development and help to build the initial project description. So once we have a project description and know how we want to move forward on developing the project, that is when we enter into the process. The work we do on the front end before we enter the process can help to speed up the process, because as we engage thoroughly at the front end, there's much more involvement and understanding of what we're trying to do. And if we have a common vision, then we can work collaboratively together to have a successful project. So we'll look at we'll look at including things like traditional knowledge, understanding the nation's vision for the development of their territories as we move forward, and this will help us to move through to an EA readiness decision, and then we enter into the process. So again, I think what's really important for us to do in 2022 is to solidify these relationships and to begin our conversation around what types of environmental studies we need to conduct as we continue our exploration activities. How will we work with the nations and the local communities? Defining that will be critical. Implementing existing and negotiating new exploration agreements will take some time, but I'm very optimistic and confident that we can come to a common view on how we can work together. Collaborate with First Nations regarding the 2022 exploration activities. What we've heard from the nations is they want to, even if we're not sure we're going to be able to fund a certain kind of project, if we go to them and we define what we need to conduct, what kind of work we need to conduct in order to prove a resource, we're better to come and have the conversation early with them so that they can actually, get their people queued up for employment opportunities, and it's best to hire local if you can. I think it helps to build that community capacity, but also reduces the costs on the company side. So developing that, sharing our vision, like how quickly do we want to move? Like what do we want to do as a company, as the investors? How do we want to move this project or Northwest Copper into a regulatory review process? And then listening and talking to them and understanding their long-term visions for their nations and their communities. So determining the baseline studies will be important. One technique would be to establish a cross-sector or cross-nation advisory committee, which has been proven to be very successful in other projects. And then jointly, defining the readiness timeline and the pathway to regulatory review. I think if we do that with them, it will prove a much more stable and predictable process as we go forward. So strong collaborative working relationships will lead to long-term partnerships. We know the nations have been there for thousands of years. They're not likely to be moving off their land. This is such a key component of the work that we're going to be doing in the coming years, but particularly in the next, I'd say, half a year. And that's all I have to say right now, but thank you.
Is it going to work for me this time?
It is going to work. This is working now.
All right. It's just one slide, so
It's one slide. Yeah, we're going to make this easy.
Thank you, Vesta. I will make a couple of comments about Vesta's discussion. One is when Vesta and I went to Smithers, we went up to Hazelton to meet the hereditary chiefs of the Gitxsan. And we got on the plane, and as we were sitting there, I ended up sitting beside her. And I don't know, it was 5 or 6 people came by on the plane to introduce them, to say, hey, what are you doing? Well, you're back working again. So she's obviously some sort of superstar in this part of the world. I didn't see any autograph signing, but people definitely knew who she was. The other thing too is, I think if you think about projects just in generally, and I think back on my kind of old background of evaluating projects with different hats on, if the risks, the key risks, particularly for a gold project, but when you move a project forward, the ones that really are most critical usually are having your resource model right, having your metallurgy right, and having your social part right. And if you get those right, you can work out all the other stuff. So all of these engagements and so on are really important to the company. It's something we really take seriously and put a lot of effort into. So important to go through it. I'm sure everyone wants to know how we're going to spend the money that we raised and how we're going to follow up on some of the high-grade results that we've done. So we're in that planning process right now, so we don't have a formal program, but just in terms of what we want to emphasize. So we're going through the PEA stage. We've told the market we will have a PEA in Q1, which will describe this magical combination of Quinnica and Stardust. We will work on that high-grade zone at Quinnica. So we've drilled that 217 zone. There are a bunch of things that we need to do on the geology side to understand it a little better. There are some geophysical techniques that can be useful to us. There are some opportunities to, well, obviously we'll be following it up. But again, coming back to my comment about how much metal there is in the per ton of rock there, it doesn't take a lot to really move the needle on this project. It doesn't change the way our advancement of the PEA, moving the PEA forward is still, we would do it regardless of what came out of that other exploration program. We've got East Niv to follow up on. Jim gave us a good overview of our current understanding of the geology there, which is to say that we don't have very many holes into it. We have a sort of decent sense of the surface, but we've got a lot to learn through drilling, but lots of room to move there and lots of opportunity to make that bigger and figure out where it all goes in a big property position. We have an opportunity to, as we move Stardust forward, there is some inferred material there that we can convert, and as part of that we can also explore Stardust a little more, which we really didn't do much of this year. We spent a lot of money and time on the ground at Lorraine this year, and have a pretty good set of targets there, and we'll mount an exploration program at Lorraine as well, a drill program, and we will be in a position to at least start advancing, thinking more about permitting and so on, having that PEA in place. So that's kind of the very general program. Again, we haven't totally formalized it, but those are the things that we want to focus on. So I think this is the time when we're Q&A, correct, Adrian?
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. Yes. So if anybody has any questions, by all means, you can either raise your hand or shout them out really quickly, and whoever would like to answer it can answer straight from the table here or from the podium. So, Tony?
Yeah, so this is 2022, and it's a good point. The resource updates, we've talked about having a resource update for Quinnica based on the drilling of this year, and also for Lorraine, which is really converting a non-compliant resource, assuming we put that out. But both of those are what we've talked about with the market. Those are before the end of 2021. So this is 2022 plans. Yep.
So a question for Jim. I understand that East Niv, the results, you're still working on the model, obviously results to come. But have you got any hunches on a structural control there for East Niv?
Not in great detail. So we know from the aeromagnetics and other work that we've done that there are some major structures. They don't go right through the East Niv target that we have now, but they go around it. So, there's one off to the east, there's another to this kind of southwest. We don't understand the displacement history on those. That's one of the components we want to get at this coming year by bringing in some external expertise to do property scale mapping, someone that has intimate knowledge of the region, and we have that person, I believe, lined up. And they will look at the structural component of the project as a whole, and we'll have a framework then in which to work. So we know there's structure. We know that it's older than the capping rocks that are younger than the hydrothermal system. The structure that is important is going to be the part down in the Takla, I think. So, yeah, we'll get a handle on that this coming year, but right now it's only generally known.
Yes.
Can you comment on your relations with POSCO?
The question is, and I was told to repeat these for the online audience, can I comment on our relations with POSCO? We, I think, have said before that our intention is to end up owning 100% of the project, and that is continues to be a goal, but I don't have anything to add on that front.
What is their percentage?
Well, the question is, what is their percentage? They owned a third of the Quinnica asset.
After the expenditure?
Well, that's not necessarily, sorry, the question is after the expenditures. That I don't have the latest calculation on, dilution and so on.
How much drilling do you plan to do in 2022? How deep do you plan to test? And is the finding the continuity of that super grade part of that 22.9, or does that lower grade?
Yeah, so how much, basically, I'll summarize, how much drilling are we going to do? How deep is it going to be? And are we going to chase the deeper high grade or the high grade stuff? I would say we will have, so this year we drilled about 12,000 meters in total. And a little over 9, a little more than that actually, but a little over 9 at Quenica Stardust, and then a little less than 3 at East Nib. We will more than likely drill more than that this year. And again, as I said, we haven't finalized a budget or anything, but just in terms of, we got more targets than we did, and so there are more things to explore. In terms of chasing that high grade, absolutely, we'll try and extend that stuff. Yes.
You mentioned what work you're doing or trying to do to get a better handle on the potential for block caving at certain ends.
The question is, what work are we doing to better understand the potential for block caving at Quenica, I assume you mean? Yeah, so the answer is we've had people, Serengeti had people look at that before. We've had people look at it. So, when you do a PEA, we're constantly doing, or not constantly, but we have ongoing internal studies where we hire external people to look at various combinations and so on. So we've had a consulting group looking at that earlier this year, and that will be part of the PEA, the study of that, if that's what your question means.
I guess I would look more for specifics in terms of how much additional drilling will be required for you to bring the geotechnical characteristics of the rock up to the standard required for the block caving experts to sign off on that.
Yeah, so the question is how much more drilling we would need to do to bring the geotechnical understanding up to the level, and I guess my answer is that the level that we have right now is adequate for the PEA. We would need to do more work for a feasibility study.
Have you given any thought of bypassing the PEA and moving more aggressively to the PFS? The PEA doesn't seem to have much impact in the marketplace.
Yeah, so the question is, would we bypass a PEA to go to the PFS? And this is actually a question that I've asked of companies before, so it's a good question and a fair question. One of the things is obviously getting Stardust to feasibility study takes a bunch of work and takes a bunch of time, and we would have some extra drilling to do there. So if we're trying to do a study where we show the combination, that would delay our ability to have that. Now I agree that the PEAs can be variable in terms of their impact on the market. The reality though is, once we have a PEA, we can speak more openly and clearly to investors and in general about the combined project, which we're somewhat constrained right now in our ability to do that just because of 43-101 rules. So there are some advantages to doing that. Yes, Tony.
For the South Zone, have you done some drilling in the South Zone with this current round to be able to include that in the PEA, or
Yeah, the question is, have we done more drilling on the South Zone to be able to include it in the PEA? There is inferred material at the South Zone. So a PEA you can include in inferred material. So if we were to consider that in the economics, then the South Zone would be fair game. Yes.
Can you touch on metallurgical testing done at this point and recovery rates you've seen?
Sure. Can you touch on metallurgical testing so far? So there's a bunch of metallurgical testing. Most of the metallurgical testing has been done on Quenica. That project has had more work on it than Stardust. The recoveries that we have for Quenica are so about 75 for gold and I think a little lower for silver, in the high 80s, low 90s for gold. The Stardust recovery is quite a lot higher than that. That's partly a function of just the grade there. So, we had recoveries plus 95% in the copper, and I think it was around 94 and a bit for all of the gold samples that we have. So quite high there. I mean, one of the important things is, as you study this, how do you put the two together? The work so far suggests the mineralogy very similar, hardness similar, sulfide grain size similar. The characteristics look very similar. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Question on the PEA, have you started detailed logistics and infrastructure studies now? It's easy to get to a property, it's easy to use Forest Service roads or whatever, but you gotta move a lot of material, you've got power, you've got water, you've got a number of things, crossing a number of First Nations territories. Have you started, I found a couple of projects where the rocks and boulders look out for themselves and infrastructure built it. How far along are you in the that part of
Yeah, so actually the best guy to answer that is sitting over at the table there, Dave Moore, because it was all done by Serengeti. But what I can tell you is there are in the studies that they did, they studied having the power come in and that portion of it. So yes.
I know you've been working hard at marketing.
Yep.
And traveling. Can you give us some comment on just the generalities of what the success and what the resistance, things of that nature, to let us know how it's coming in the market?
Yeah, the question is how does marketing how has marketing gone, and what kind of feedback or pushback or support do I get when I speak to various types of investors? I would say that typically you don't actually get that much, or I don't anyway get that much negative feedback on, which is not necessarily always a good thing. But people, I think the questions that people ask are, people want to know about the metallurgy. People want to know about the First Nations. People want to know about permitting. They want to know people, and particularly it obviously depends on what kind of people you're marketing to. If people are, kind of experienced resource investors or more generalist investors, most generalist investors, their main question is, I see what you're doing here. I understand what you're trying to do, but how many years is it going to be before you're taking concentrate out of the project? Whereas, people who have more of a mining background ask much more specific questions. We've had, I think, we've had really good success in getting in front of a bunch of institutions in the last little while, and actually that drill hole was very helpful for getting in front of some people who were probably a little bit resistant prior to that. So that's been really good lately.
Excellent. We do have a couple of questions from our online audience as well. So the first one is, does the contiguous nature of the properties potentially allow for a hub and spoke type operation?
So potentially, yes. We have discussed the possibility of taking some material, if the grade were high enough, from Lorraine to Konika Stardust. Now, East Niv is a standalone project, so we're not going to be moving any of that material down anywhere else. So the answer is possibly, certainly something that we are looking at and will look at more seriously. As of right now, we don't even have a compliant resource at Lorraine, so we can't really incorporate it in any kind of study yet.
Excellent. The other question we have here is, what is the plan to raise the corporate profile to national and international high net worth and institutional investors?
That's a complicated question.
Let's go with part one.
It must be this lunch for starters. We do marketing of all kinds, retail marketing, Canadian retail marketing, Toronto retail marketing, institutional marketing, through Zoom, basically everywhere. So we've, people in Europe, people in London, people in the US, people in Australia, Canada. So we've done lots of that. We have done some, we do have a US over-the-counter listing. We've done some US high net worth type marketing. We haven't done a whole ton of it, but it is obviously part of the trying to get more liquidity and support. Any other questions? Oh, we got a live question.
Second question related to the marketing.
Yep.
When do you plan to update the corporate presentation which is on the website? It's, in my opinion, efficient.
The question is, when are we going to update the presentation on the website? So I don't want to make an excuse for this, but what I have done is when we put that some of the results out, I quickly updated my version of the thing and used that for marketing. But we need to go back if it's not updated and make sure the corporate one is done.
You're doing a lot of marketing, you're doing a lot of Zoom meetings with various analysts. And I noticed that not all of those presentations are copied or linked to the website. And I think sometimes the retail investment rely on the website for information is missing out. You're sharing information with Zoom here, that old-fashioned internet.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and yep.
More direct emphasis on the website, all of the Zooming, and Zooming is posted quickly, because there is information in those presentations, addressing the questions of those analysts, and certainly are not reflected in the corporate presentation.
Yep.
What was the comment?
The comment was that the deck on the website is not fully up to date. Yes.
Copper projects globally appear to be very undervalued, despite the copper price being at a healthy level of $450 per pound. Any idea what the catalyst, and despite the EV revolution, any idea what might be the catalyst to change that landscape?
Yeah, so the question is, or the statement is that global copper projects are undervalued, and despite a strong copper price and support for copper, and what might be the catalyst to make that happen. I mean, you know, a lot of copper projects, if we're talking about copper projects that aren't in production yet, perpetually suffer from a financing overhang. So, you know, projects that require billions of dollars in capital, which is absolutely not the kind of project we're trying to build, those projects will always trade at a deep discount because people, you know, don't believe that they'll get them funded. So, you know, I think we've seen a little bit of activity in M&A. For example, one thing is the mine in Spain, Matsa, taken out. So a little bit of indication that people are moving forward. But, you know, I think normally it takes a bit of not just copper price rise, but copper price stability for more M&A to take place.
Okay, we have one more question from online here, Peter, and it's a bit of a tricky one to answer, but realistically, what do you see as the potential for NorthWest? Could we be a mid-tier miner or even bigger than that?
That's hard. It is a hard question.
It's a hard question to ask.
I don't want to be smart ass about this. I mean, you know, you can take a project through, put it into production, become a producer, and then, you know, if we were, you know, in some sort of dream financing scenario, build East Niv, you know, you turn yourself into a 2-mine copper producer. I mean, that requires a lot of things to happen and a lot of movement along the way. I mean, our goal as a company is to create value through drilling, through de-risking the project, and through, you know, our exposure to copper. And there are lots of ways to do that. And some of them are building the project, some of them are selling it, and some, you know, so there's potential for that to happen. But, you know, there are a lot of potential outcomes for the company.
Absolutely.
Harsh has got a question.
Okay, Harsh.
Your thoughts on NorthWest valuation relative to peers?
I wish I had an analyst here to answer that for me. So I think that I don't think there's enough value in the Quenica Stardust combination in the share price. So I think we're undervalued there, and particularly I think we you know, demonstrate. One of the reasons that I want to be able to talk really freely about that project is that the ability that smaller capital number there, in theory, should provide for a better valuation because it's, more realistic to fund a small project than a big multi-billion-dollar project. So what is possible is that if we have more clarity on that, then we can have more recognition and more value ascribed to that project, so not trade as big a discount because the financing overhang of building it is not as crazy. I don't think, I know you've asked me this before, and other people have asked me if there's value in the exploration projects. There's probably a little more in it than there was, but I think we're kind of gradually raising people's awareness of things and getting better recognition. But I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how we rank on a exact value base. Partly because we don't have a study, we don't have a NAV, we don't. It's harder to pin that down. Yes, Tony.
Mark had indicated 7 million ounces of gold equivalent taking a few pieces into account. That's without taking into account Nico's 2 years of exploration. So I assume that with the resource estimate update, that number should improve. And the question I have is, Mark was successful in 2011 selling a property for $2.3 billion. And I believe we may have had close to 8 million ounces of gold. Is there any kind of disconnect that I'm missing here?
Do you want me to answer that?
I do want you to answer that.
Sure, let me answer this one. I guess my first response is 2 different cycles, first of all, right? So the cycle in that era, peaked in around 2011. And there was lots of exuberance and potentially some recklessness and what have you, right? We're not in that kind of mindset or that kind of cycle right now, right? We're not seeing that kind of M&A. In fact, the only M&A we're seeing in the gold space is from the Australians, right? They're coming in and eating our lunch, and that's about it. And the second response is this isn't a gold project. I mean, I threw that out there as a bit of alchemy for people to kind of yardstick. What is this equivalent to in sort of jargon or vernacular that they're used to comparing things, and gold is a useful tool for that, right? This is a copper gold project. It's branded as a copper gold project. Copper, has a higher discount rate. Copper has a higher capex to build, longer lead times to get into production. I mean, it's a tougher commodity for a junior. And I think the challenge that we face as a company to sort of reposition this story is very iterative, right? And so we've spent the last year just getting people to pay attention again, right? And the results that we've been able to generate have stimulated that reinterest. Now we need to keep people interested, and we need to build that value by institutionalizing the story, which this last financing has done. So hopefully, by the end of the next year, we've got people who believe in it again. It had been in a long forgotten, sort of abandoned story, more or less, certainly institutionally. So we've got eyes on it again. It's backed up by really solid results that are world class. And we just need to grow from there.
I think we should probably finish
that's a good
question
place to
Q&A there, but
before they get any harder.
Yeah, I appreciate all the questions and everyone's attention. So thank you for coming, and glad we could do something here in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
A really quick note before we let everybody go. We will email everyone out a copy of the presentations today, particularly from the great technological crash of the early part of this presentation. So make sure everybody's got it, gets a chance to see that. And if there are any additional questions or anything else anybody'd like to ask, both for our online audience and for anyone here, you can email aobrien@northwestcopper.ca, and I'll make sure that those questions get answered, and we'll get back to you. Excellent. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you, everyone.